thank you for having me. My name is Kizzy, Charles-Guzman. I'm a Deputy Director at the Mayor's Office of Resiliency. I focus on social resiliency, and I will not be talking to you about Hurricane Sandy, for the love of God. You know, I'm glad to be here and to have heard some of the comments in the earlier sessions, because I think it'll help to kind of put into context some of the work that we are doing and why I think about this ongoing need for preparedness and engagement a little differently, right? So the first thing is that when I said I won't talk about Hurricane Sandy, I want to talk to you about heat instead. And so we're starting there because, again, if we're preparing for a changing climate, one of the things that is really important is to be practicing all the time, right? It's a muscle, and so instead of waiting for the next superstorm, if we focus on the thing that actually claims more lives and the thing that happens several times every single year and the thing that is actually a much bigger public health and equity threat, then we'll be better prepared to recover faster and to respond more appropriately when we do face those larger scale disasters. So this is a fuzzy map, but what you're supposed to get out of it is that many locations all across the globe have experienced their hottest weather in recorded history. In fact, July was the hottest month on record for our entire planet. And it continues to get worse over time. Heat exposure is deadly, and sadly it is preventable. So I am here and I get up every morning and I go to work because I am angry that every single death is preventable and that social cohesion was one of those ways in which we could have prevented those deaths. But also very importantly, indoor temperatures can be up to 20 degrees hotter than whatever is happening outside. So think about that in the next time that you hear that it's 110 degrees outside, right? So the other thing I would really care about, and that also makes me angry, is how is it that we design buildings, and why is it that knowing that people spend over 90% of their time indoors, right? Why are we so focused on changing environments in the outdoors, right? Which is wonderful, but at the end, we also need to be doing something to retrofit our existing building stock, right? Most of the buildings that we have in New York today, actually over 90% of them, will still be here in 2050. So thank you for great new construction, but also we need to do something about these death traps that we call our existing building stock. That was supposed to be funny. Oh my gosh. I am a lot funnier when I am not as sick. So anyways, in New York City, heat mortality rates are associated with poverty, of course, and poor housing quality. And so I really want to continue to show you some of this. Residential air conditioning prevalence is unequally distributed across our neighborhoods. And on average, as a result, we have every summer about 450 people go to the emergency department on heat-related visits, and about 150, more or less, heat-related hospital admissions. So these are not low numbers. We have on average about 13 heat stroke deaths and about 115 excess deaths from heat-related causes. And so what that means is that heat stroke wasn't the primary cause of death in your death certificate, but you had an underlying health condition, be it cardiovascular disease, diabetes, respiratory illness, which was made worse by the heat or by dehydration, right? So these are not small numbers. Again, to put it in context, Hurricane Sandy claimed the lives of 44 New Yorkers, and we mobilized a response of $22 billion, right? But this happens every summer, and we didn't have a plan, right? So I wanted to show you this map because this information really gave us the onus, right, to develop a heat adaptation strategy for the city of New York. And that's what my team focuses on. It's called Cool Neighborhoods New York City. So the map on the left, I guess it's, yeah, on your left, shows you that heat risk varies by neighborhood, right? So the red areas are areas that have high heat vulnerability. The yellow areas, they're doing all right. This is an index that was co-developed by Columbia University and the city's Department of Health a few years ago, and it is the basis for our program. So in those red squares, those are census tracts, we have about 3.4 million people that are living there. So it's not a small population. It's larger than many American cities, the population of many American cities. And we also have over 2 million New Yorkers that don't have any access to air conditioning. So this is a significant public health issue, and it's an equity issue, correct? So we have developed a series of strategies, right, in Cool Neighborhoods that are trying to address these challenges, right? We have dedicated a bit under $110 million to Cool Neighborhoods New York City. You can find that online. I'm not going to spend a ton of time describing the many initiatives in the plan. But based on what I heard earlier today, so a lot of the focus on social cohesion and social resiliency seems to be on community engagement. We are doing some of that. I'm not going to get into that. We have launched buddy programs, buddy systems to identify potentially isolated New Yorkers, vulnerable New Yorkers, so you have neighbors checking on neighbors. We are conducting trainings for home health aides and community health workers so that, again, they have the information they need as they already are going to visit increasingly vulnerable clients. So I'm not going to cover that because I have a sense that we'll spend a lot of the rest of the session talking about that. Instead, I want to talk about the built environment and the things that we are doing trying to really change the way that people experience heat, right? So these are some of the components of Cool Neighborhoods, and the next few slides are just going to be very quick, kind of before and afters, to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So again, I want you to remember the red areas, because when I say high heat vulnerability neighborhoods, I am talking about the red areas, okay? So we are spending a bit over $100 million planting trees in the red areas and the high heat vulnerability neighborhoods. And I want to focus on street tree planting for a second, because you know and you have heard about the city's Million Trees program, and it is a wonderful program. And this is a bit of a continuation of that, but in a very targeted manner. And part of this is, again, a very key principle that I think is important when it comes to climate resiliency, which is that we need to figure out a way to redress the disinvestment, the decades of disinvestment that we had in communities in New York City. Sorry, Park Slope, you're not getting a single tree out of my pot of money. I am putting them in Flatbush because it is hard to find a street in some Brooklyn neighborhoods, right? And we are so devoid of shade in a way that in just a 5-year period, if you can see here, this is a street in Manhattan. And then just 5 years later, after planting, you see that you can create a completely different feel in that neighborhood. Not just so that it can increase property values, but rather so that we can encourage people to actually leave their apartment where they're baking because they don't perceive the streetscape to be hotter. And maybe that tunnel, that corridor, that cooler corridor will encourage them to actually go to their nearest cooling center. Does that make sense? So the focus of Cool Neighborhoods is not to do the feel-good thing of bringing together volunteers and corporate sponsors to plant trees in parks, though that's great. The focus is to make sure that the street trees, which work so hard, are taken care of and are planted in the places where we haven't planted them for the past 30 years. I also want to give a shout out to some of our partners. We have done a lot of work trying to get schoolyards to become more active centers and greener spaces, right? These are some of the projects by the Trust for Public Land, converting schoolyards into playgrounds. And you can see before and after. And the goal is, again, to help to cool down the neighborhood by decreasing the amount of asphalt that we just have laying around. So these are the places where we expect children to play during a recess. It is hot as heck. You do not want to sit there. Why would children want to sit there, right? So we want to activate these places and make them places that have lighter colored pavements, places that have trees, that have vegetation, but also that have porous pavements that are retaining water, that are helping to get many co-benefits that we wouldn't just get from just asphalt, even though asphalt is cheap. Okay, also want to give a shout out to our Parks Department, which has launched the Community Parks Initiative, which is also a way of addressing equity, right? So again, instead of making these huge investments, and I'm not saying instead as if we're not doing that, but rather really having a stated goal to invest in the smaller playgrounds, in the smaller parks, doing comprehensive analysis of existing city data and understanding what are the places in the city where we haven't actually upgraded the monkey bars for a long time, and putting hundreds of millions of dollars there, even though everyone loves a big destination park, right? We want to do both, but really, if you ask me, the priority should be in making sure that we get to the density of people, to our densest neighborhoods that have the least access to some of our bigger parks. And so over the last few years, since 2014, when we launched this program, New York City Parks Department has completed about 110 playgrounds and parks improvements in key neighborhoods that have been underserved over time. So this is about $318 million investments. And during this process, schools and school children are always engaged, right, as part of improvement and programming and trying to make sure that we have dedicated programming and dedicated staff that are helping to connect New Yorkers with their parks. Another shout out that I want to give is to our Department of Small Business Services and our contractor, Sustainable South Bronx, who's helping us to do a strategic implementation of our already funded, thank you, Cool Roofs program. And so in this sense, before we were doing Cool Roofs extensively and citywide, and now we are making a more comprehensive effort to conduct targeted outreach to building owners and nonprofit organizations, supportive housing. We're basically coding nonprofits for free, right? In order to make sure that we are getting a lot of coverage and a lot of concentration in the red areas of the city. Again, trying to lower temperature in that. And also meaning that we're lowering the temperature inside of the buildings where people are spending most of their time, right? So we're helping them with their energy bill in that case, but we're also creating clusters of buildings that are that have the white roofs. And so in the first full year of implementation of Cool Neighborhoods, we actually installed 73% of our cool roofs in these high HVI areas. So I'm very proud of that, and the goal is to get to 100% in the coming years. So this is the before and after, and this is public housing in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and you can see our very distinctive NYCHA properties, and here just after coding, a year later. So this is what it also looks like to build social resiliency and climate resiliency from a top-down level, and I'm okay with top-down. The last shout out I want to do is that we have passed legislation requiring buildings to address heat hazards, and so we not only are requiring and expanded the requirement for cool roofs, right, for new buildings and substantial renovations, so those are the white roofs. They're also now required for sloped roofs, and we also now require them to have either solar panels or green roofs on them. And look, these are expensive technologies. We expect that this will take longer to get into fully, to get them to uptake. But we also expect that we will get about 1 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2030 from this policy. We also expect a significant amount of stormwater managed every year. And so what that means is that, yes, we can have significant adaptation that is focused on community engagement, but at the end of the day, when you guys are talking about engaging communities, also don't forget about government agencies as the community that is making decisions every day with your tax dollars, right? And if it's all the same to them, why not prioritize the neighborhoods that have been historically disenfranchised and disinvested, but also, if it's all the same, why don't we encourage the retrofit and the investment in facilities that actually build social cohesion, right? We just announced a few weeks ago that we're doing deep energy retrofits in city buildings. I am so proud of that work. But we are putting shelters ahead of sanitation garages. Because shelters, it's where some of our most vulnerable populations spend a significant amount of their time. So we do want to improve those HVAC systems right away and increase, right, the energy efficiency of those facilities first. Same amount of tax dollars, one can happen a little before the other because of the significant impact it would have for public health. So that's just a case study that I wanted to share with you. Thank you for your attention. I'll be around for questions.